This is going to be a TV review like one you've not seen before. That made more sense in my head. This is a TV review like no other TV. Let's get into it. Right, let me do something I don't normally do. I'm going to take you off that tripod and show you something, because I don't like doing TV reviews. They're just a faff when it comes to the logistics and all that stuff, because they're so big, they're heavy, and you have to do lots of complex testing. As you might guess, if you've come to this channel before, I don't do that complex testing, but you still need to get fairly specific with it. Anyway, what I want to show you is the testing area for TVs in this studio, which is very small. You can't sit back far enough from the TV to begin with. We have loads of light coming in, which is actually quite a good test, which I'll show you later on. This is the LG C5, and this isn't the Panasonic Z95B, because it's had to go back to Panasonic, because they want it back, obviously. The other thing with TV reviews, review units are very hard to get hold of. So I have to work with what I've got. But I thought this was going to be quite an interesting comparison, because the C5 is cheaper than the Z95B by quite a bit. We'll put the pricing down here. And because of that, I was just thinking, well, what do you get if you spend less on an OLED TV versus a flagship brand new OLED TV, which, well, they're both new, but you get the point. Do you get anything more for your money that's worth thinking about? In this review, this comparison, whatever you want to call it, I will not be going into minute detail about pixels and color profiles and all that stuff. I'm just going to do the absolute basics. Which of these two TVs is better, in my opinion? Regardless, we will have some fun with this. I'm going to make a coffee, go back upstairs, and talk TVs. This is going to be a fun video, isn't it? Regular viewers amongst you may have noticed that this video looks different as well. The reason for that is because it's being shot in 60 frames per second. The reason for that is because you have to shoot in a higher frame rate to demonstrate what these TVs can do. If I shoot it in the regular 24 frames per second that we normally use on this channel, I get told off in the comment section by the TV people. I don't want to be told off too much by the TV people in this video, so that I'm just reducing the number of things they can complain about, basically. So what I thought I'd do in this comparison is look at ease of use, overall picture quality, audio quality, gaming, and how those TVs deal with a very bright reflective room, which I think is important, and then which one I prefer. Easy. I've never been the most technical person in the room, which is why I started this channel, to talk about tech like an average Joe. And it's why when people start talking about APIs and SQL, my eyes glaze over slightly and I Google that stuff later. And that's why I've been so impressed with this week's sponsor, Bootdev. It's an online platform that teaches you back-end development in a way that's practical, even if you're not coming from a computer science background like me. You learn by actually writing code, not watching endless lectures or getting buried in jargon. And it's focused on back-end stuff like Python, JavaScript, and Go, which are all foundational languages that quietly power the apps and websites we all use. But the best part? It's structured, it's hands-on, and it uses tactics from modern game design to help you learn. There's even an AI coach to nudge you along if you get stuck. Bootdev aren't promising that you'll become an amazing developer overnight, and that is so refreshing. It's built for people who genuinely want to understand how this stuff works and want to build those skills over time. So if you've ever been curious about how back-end development works, or you just really want to get into it and make it a living or a hobby or whatever it might be, I really recommend Bootdev. The link is down below. Let's start with ease of use, and both of these TVs were incredibly easy to get out of the box on my own, which you're probably not supposed to do. You probably need one more person to help you with these. But these are the 55-inch versions, by the way, so they're not particularly massive. They are manageable if you have to do it on your own, but don't take that as guidance, because if you hurt yourself, I'm not responsible for that, basically. The setup on the LG C5 was a bit of a pain. However, I have to caveat that with the fact that I think it might be down to the Wi-Fi in the studio, which is a bit problematic at times. Basically, when you set up the LG C5 and the Panasonic as well, you can either do it via the old-fashioned caveman method of using the remote control, or you can scan a QR code and do it via your phone. The LG C5 uses the LG Think with a Q app. It just wouldn't let me go past the Wi-Fi setup, which is why I'm wondering if it's the network in this studio, to be fair, so I won't grade it badly because of that, but I did have to go back to the old method of setting it up with the remote control. But that didn't take too long. The Panasonic Z95B, like I say, did work perfectly with the app. It's Amazon Fire TV, that's the OS that it uses. And yes, because it's Amazon, you do get hit with a couple of ads for their services, but you can obviously ignore those and carry on. And I was in to the Z95B much quicker than the C5. The other thing to mention is the remote controls, which you may or may not use depending on what else you're using with this TV. Obviously at home, we just use the Apple TV remote, but if you do intend on using the remote control, the Panasonic one is massive. It's so long compared to the LG one. Does that matter? I don't know. It's worth mentioning. The other thing that I don't like about the LG C5 is the kind of cursor thing that pops up. So you can use the remote control normally, just with the buttons, or you can point it at the screen and you get a little cursor that pops up and you can use it like a mouse. That is incredibly fiddly. And it kind of pops up occasionally when you don't want it to. And maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I just like the button pressy thing. Let's just keep that. The design is interesting because the Z95B looks more old-fashioned than the C5. The C5 has this hang on. It has this very thin, slim profile, which looks more modern. It has this kind of textured rear casing, which looks nice, but I do wonder what the point of that is, because most people will put it against a wall. You'll never see that. But in fairness, it looks more modern than the Panasonic Z95B. But Panasonic does have these kind of, this is a compliment, I promise. It's a kind of 90s/early 2000s vibe, which is what Panasonic does. They're not stuck in that era, but they are definitely of that era. And for someone like me who is of that era as well, I love it, and I think it plays to a certain audience as well. It's thicker than the C5 by quite a distance. There is a reason for that, which I'll come on to in a bit, and it's quite an important one, I think. But they do look very, very different. And again, as is always the case with design and tech, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and what I like, you may not like, etc. But get involved in the comments. Let me know which one you would prefer to have in your living room. For me, I'd take the Panasonic, I think, because the reason it is thicker matters, and I'll get to that later. Let's talk about the picture quality, and just to remind you guys, and particularly the TV people, I'm not going to talk about specs. I've not mentioned a single spec yet, you may have noticed that, because I don't care. I don't understand them. I find them deeply boring, to be honest, that the whole pixel peeping thing. I respect the people that do it. There's some very, very good TV reviewers out there. If you know who Vincent is, and you know his channel, you know who I'm talking about. He's amazing, and a lovely guy as well. I'm going to talk about these two TVs as I saw them, and I ran them through a few tests, which was mainly kind of 4K HDR footage. These settings are out of the box. I set them to the standard picture quality. The only thing I changed was the brightness. The brightness was set to 100% on both, and I set the high peak HDR brightness setting as well. They were set to, let's see what these things can do in the standard mode. I didn't change anything else. And the C5 was just sharper. Particularly with this nature footage, it just looks much more pleasing to my eye. Again, this is fairly subjective, and I should note as well that you can tweak both of these TVs almost to the nth degree, which is very hard to say. Because of that, they are, they can be comparable once you've tweak them and do all that, but out of the box, and I think a lot of people will just take them out of the box, plug them in, maybe change a couple of settings here and there. For me, the C5 is much sharper. However, the Z95B definitely pops more. It definitely has much more saturated and vibrant colors. The C5 has a slight bluey, kind of greeny tint, which I'm sure you could get rid of if you tweak the settings, but you only see that when you place it against the Z95B. If you put them both side by side, that's where you see that difference. Also, the Z95B is brighter. Don't know the specs between these two in terms of the nits and all that sort of stuff, but again, just looking at these two TVs side by side with both of them having the maximum brightness, maximum HDR, the Z95B is quite a bit brighter. And because these are OLED panels, well, that is something which I guess is pretty important, isn't it? Because you expect very deep blacks, and by the way, that the blacks on these TVs are incredibly rich. I can't really pick between them on that. I think they're both, as they should be, very, very good. But you expect those very rich, deep blacks, and you expect these days very bright highlights. And the Z95B does just about beat the C5 in that respect, which I guess is down to that panel technology. That is where you're getting a bit more for your money. The one thing I did notice though is that the Z95B seemed to pick up a little bit more noise and just the artifacts that you get from a YouTube video. These are YouTube videos, by the way, that I'm streaming to these two TVs. Again, the TV people probably won't like that. I should probably have Blu-ray players linked up to them or so. I don't know, I have no idea, but I don't have any of that stuff. The easiest thing for me to do was to basically have the same 4K HDR stuff from YouTube playing into those TVs. In terms of things like banding and uniform brightness across the screen, they're both fantastic. I didn't notice any problems with either of those elements on either of those TVs. The great thing about this, I think, is that if you buy an OLED TV that costs more, well, let's say 2,000 upwards, it's going to be one of the best viewing experiences you've ever had. And you're not going to have that thing where if you spend less, you're looking for dead pixels and banding, and you're looking for, dark spots in the corners. That doesn't seem to exist in either of these TVs, which should be the case given how expensive they are. But for me, the overall winner in terms of picture quality is that LG C5, because I just prefer that sharper image and I prefer the slightly more muted colors. Audio quality. Now, this never used to matter to me with TVs because I just used to use a surround sound system, which we have installed at home. However, I then became a dad, and because our son sleeps above, his room is above the lounge, for the last 3 years, we've not used that surround sound system anywhere near as much as we used to. So we've been relying on the TV's own speakers. So I now get it. I understand why people care about this stuff. The one thing I will say is that I'm not going to do a test that you can hear between those two TVs on this video. The reason for that is because it's not representative at all of what you will hear in the room. I know people don't like this, but if I record the audio from those TVs, it goes into that mic, which colors that sound immediately. It then goes through our processing during the editing process, and then it gets uploaded to YouTube, and YouTube just compresses it and does all sorts of things that we don't know about. And then you listen to it through a set of speakers, which could be your iPhone, it could be a pair of headphones or whatever. It's not representative at all. So you're just going to have to take my word for this. The LG C5 sounds worse than the Panasonic Z95B, and the reason for that is because Panasonic owns Technics, and Technics is behind the audio in that Z95B. There's a little Technics badge on the top of it, and it just sounds better. It's richer, there's more bass, it's much clearer, it's wider. The C5 by comparison just doesn't sound great. It's just not good, which is a shame. It shouldn't be a thing that stops you from buying it. And I do think that most people who buy that TV or either of these TVs, let's be honest, will be using some form of soundbar or something. But it's worth bearing in mind if you're intending on using the TV audio more than anything else, the Panasonic is better. They do both have AI sound settings. On the Panasonic, I couldn't spot any difference whatsoever. On the C5, it just made it sound even worse. It was really weird. But that's AI for you, isn't it? Gaming. Now, I am 44 years old, and because of that, the only gaming device I can get on with these days is the Switch, and specifically the Switch 2. We'll put a link to my Switch 2 review at the end of this video, because I think if you're of a similar age to me, you'll find that video very interesting, hopefully. And it's great on both of them. They've both got game modes, as you would expect. The game mode on the LG seems to be a bit more fully featured than the Panasonic, but I didn't change any of the settings. I just plugged it in, made sure game mode was running on both TVs, and played Donkey Kong and Mario Kart. I didn't do anything else, basically. I can't compare them side by side because I don't have two Switches. It was a plug it into one and then plug it into the next one type affair. They both did an amazing job, and why wouldn't they? They are fantastic gaming TVs. I can't really choose between them. I'm sure there's reasons you would, but spec-wise, they're pretty much identical and they look great. That's it. What's next? Oh yeah, reflections. Unless your lounge has no windows and no doors and no light, basically, unless you live in a cinema, your TV is going to have to deal with quite a challenging set of lighting conditions, which is why I think my fairly terrible testing area downstairs is actually quite good, because it has loads of light flooding in from those windows and the door, and some fairly harsh overhead lights as well. They both dealt with the overhead lights very well. You can't really see them being reflected at all in either of the panels, but the LG did struggle a bit more with those bright windows in front of it than the Panasonic did. In fairness, the LG was a bit closer to those windows, which makes it a slightly unfair test, but trust me, the Panasonic just dealt with those reflections better. That said, they both deal with the reflections very well. Once the TVs were on and I was playing games or watching stuff, I didn't spot them at all. It's a tie, kind of, because of that, but equally, once the TVs are turned off, you can tell that the Panasonic has a slightly better anti-reflective coating, I guess. It's just slightly better than the C5. Good news, we've reached the conclusion and we've done it together. So thank you so much for coming with me on this weird journey. If you have come this far, then if you wouldn't mind hitting that subscribe button, it makes a big difference, because clearly something is working for you on this video. You've engaged with it, you may have got involved in the comments, and you might like future videos. However, my conclusion is very simple. If you said to me, which of these two TVs would you buy for yourself? It would be the LG C5, and that's for two reasons. One, it's cheaper, and two, for me personally, it's got a better image out of the box. It's sharper, I prefer the colours, that's it. It would be nice to have the same audio quality as the Panasonic. I do prefer the looks of the Panasonic personally, but one other difference is the fact that the Panasonic has a swivelly stand. Does that matter? I don't know, but I forgot to mention that earlier. But yeah, for me, the C5 just wins. That said, they are both fantastic TVs. They're really good. No one is going to buy both and put them side by side and notice any of these differences. So if you choose either one of these TVs, you'll be very, very happy. But it's over to you now, guys. You've probably started talking in the comments already, but if you haven't, get involved and tell me which of these two TVs you'd buy. Right, I'm off to bed.